Ever wondered how to draw your anime characters, maybe even paint a little background? All with that nice anime touch to it, almost looking like a screenshot from the television. So stay till the end, because I also share some neat tricks that you do even after you're done with the hard part of the illustration. So right here we got Chapter 28 of Apple Black Volume 4. I already have a very rough sketch of what I imagine it will look like. You can think of it as a storyboard. And again, to save time, this is what I'm going to be working with and then going to paint over. And we're starting with the backgrounds here. Proof that really you can start wherever is comfortable for you. There isn't one way to do anything. It's up to you. First thing to keep in mind when doing backgrounds is even the professionals use reference. Sometimes it's real photos, sometimes it's a mood board. You see me use Pinterest a lot on this channel. Sometimes it's very curated for them. There are even creators that basically manipulate photos in Photoshop. But for this video, we're going to be keeping it pretty simple. And we have our characters here, Caesar and Jekyll, kind of entering some kind of chamber in the desert here. If you read the rest of the chapter, and maybe if you read the whole volume 4, it might allude to maybe what they're doing here. But I know they're in the desert, and I know it's daytime. I know I want it to be very sunny. All of these things are details you want to have jotted down, ironclad, before you jump into the thing. And in some cases, even the sketch, you want to have several iterations before you get to this point. I like to start with a gradient. A gradient for what the sky is going to look like, and maybe a little bit what the heat or light emitting from the ground or wherever is going to be coming from and how that contrasts with one another. Maybe it's really sunny, it's hitting the sand, and the sand might be glowing a little bit. Maybe at a distance there's some atmospheric pressure or just dust or sand in the distance. It just makes everything look very hot. So that also means the shadows are going to be high contrast. Not worried about details or clouds or the details in the sand just yet, but that comes right after. There are creators who paint the backgrounds all in one layer, but sometimes it's not necessarily in one layer. Sometimes they're working in multiple layers, and then over time they duplicate those layers and then merge and then work on the merged one that's above all the other layers. But I'm keeping it fairly simple here, as you can see on the right. Created a new layer for the sand, and again, they're layers, so you kind of have to think of them that way. There's still a building that's in front of the characters, there's still what the characters are standing on, all of that, but I'm going step by step. It allows you to think much clearer. These are parts where you can use reference, or you can freestyle it if you're already pretty solid at this. With the little experience I have painting backgrounds, I'm purposely leaving some of the blue on the sand. It's almost like a reflection from the skies. It also makes it look a little bit more realistic. Again, you can look at direct reference to kind of get comfortable before you dive into things. It's very common. In fact, you have creators who purposely go out and take real photos of their own that they're going to use as reference. Now, I'm not going to go too ham, because one is at a distance, and so it's going to be a little bit blurry anyways. At least that's what I want. And then there's going to be a lot of characters in front of them, and so I'm picking my spots. Do your due diligence to find the right brushes that will capture what you're looking for, but make no mistake, I'm using the basic Clip Studio paint brushes, as you see. Now, this is a chapter cover from the book, so the page itself is with dimensions and page templates that I actually use for the rest of the manga pages and what's going to be used in the books. If you guys are interested in my manga page templates, storyboard templates that you've seen in those videos, access to sample pages and the double spread page, along with a double spread page template, all of that is available in my Gumroad, so you guys can go check that out. Use Anime White for a 20% off discount. Now, on a separate layer above the sand, I'm doing the little wall on the side. That's kind of the side of the door that they're coming in. One of the things I like to keep in mind, it's a lot going on. There's a lot to learn. It's not easy. This takes time and practice. You're not going to learn it with one go. There's some painters that are much messier than others. There's some that look more 3D. It's up to you, and you just need to find what works for you. Over here, I'm starting simple, but then I'm trying to find parts of that wall that will be hit with light. What's that light going to look like? I know generally it's going to be warm. What parts are going to be dark? What parts are going to be darker? What parts are going to be light? What parts are going to be lighter? And these are the things that are going to give that wall a little bit more depth and make it feel more 3D. Same for the floor. Same for the stairs that they climbed right before they got to the door. Maybe the wall and the door and all of that is made of clay, which is an excuse for it to not exactly be 100% perfect, straight, and all of that. And again, depending on your style, that's okay. Go look at Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood and look at the backgrounds. It's not all perfect. Sometimes that's the stylistic aesthetic that they're going for. But you could be perfect if you want. Again, figuring out the light parts, the dark parts, also knowing the light source and how that's going to interact with things. And then the parts that are just going to be flat, they're never going to be like completely flat. Sometimes they will, depending on the material. But all of this is what you're keeping in mind while still using reference, thinking of color theory, thinking of the lighting and how that would interact with things. Trust me, there's a lot of trial and error. It is not easy. I also try to make it cool, so I inscribe some things in the wall, and while inscribing, you're going to have like the dark part of it, then you're going to have the light part that based off of the light source, you're going to figure out what side that's going to be on. It could be a lot. Then I wanted to add this kind of Anubis type dog, which is tied to where Caesar is from a little bit. At least parts of that culture has kind of influenced some of the decisions I've made with the character, his background, his design, and all that. It's very subtle. There's also like a tiny blue on the bridge of the nose of the dog. I'm figuring out the parts that are shaded, parts that will be lighter than others. I'm still going to work on it with another layer above it, maybe playing with adjustment layers to make everything work. Usually linear burn. In some cases, you might want to clip it to the layer below. All up to you. And then I have a gradient at the top, picking the right blending mode and the right opacity to kind of give the vibe of sunlight from above. And generally, we now have enough of our background to maybe touch on other stuff. If you're enjoying this video, please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell so you stay notified each time I upload absolutely anything. And then here we have my inking. Obviously, we've seen me do this a lot on the channel, but for those who are new, welcome. First, it all depends on you. There are people who ink straight from the very rough sketch, as you see me doing, to save time. But then there are people that take this very rough sketch, do a more refined sketch, and then ink with a little bit more ease. If that's the way you want to move, you move that way. But with my inking, I'm trying to get clean lines, clean strokes, inspired by that traditional anime look, black lines. But I have seen people play around with colored lines. But either way, this is digital. You can always change the line color later if you want to. But just with this rough sketch, I am visualizing what it will look like in that refined sketch, and just trying to ink that with the first try. I'm careful using the Control-Z, that is your friend. One of the perks of digital, take advantage of it. And that's all this is. Obviously, this takes time. All of this requires a lot of practice, trial and error, confidence built over years of doing this. Very clean, smooth lines, so you want to be very loose with your wrist, confident with the strokes. Control-Z as many times as you need to until you get the lines that you need, and finish up the drawing. Starting off, I filled the characters with a dark hue based off of the environment, so we want something very warm, orangey, but a dark version of it. Looking at the color wheel in the bottom left, just imagine whatever color you pick, but far center right-ish. Then I reduce the opacity, blending mode, linear burn. Experiment with the blending modes to find what works best for you. Multiply is a good one, overlay, and so on and so forth. And then reduce the opacity accordingly. Depends on how intense you want it to feel. And I do this to really have the characters match their surroundings. Sometimes, if this was actual anime, they wouldn't always do this with the initial drawings or layers. They might do this in After Effects to really have the characters blend in with the environment and give them this hue touch. But here we're doing it manually, if you will. And then you have another layer with a similar blending mode, higher opacity, the same hue, and then I'm adding more shadows, like darker shadows. We can even use this to cast a shadow for both characters that would match the environment, and this is part of the reason why we drew the backgrounds first. With these drawings, I'm trying to push it a little bit. With all my chapter covers for Volume 4, I tried to just push it and do something slightly different than what I would traditionally do or usually do to have a simple anime cel shading type approach. And with this one, I used the airbrush with another layer with the same blending mode, same linear burn. But this time the airbrush is just soft, and this whole time I'm taking into account the light source. You can do this as many times as necessary. I also do this for the highlights in the hair or shiny objects, but then that blending mode might be add or add glow, and I'll also reduce the opacity. Or maybe color dodge as well. Again, experiment and you will find what works best for you, developing your own style and your own voice when it comes to your own work. And then I add the actual colors, like the color flats. And here, I'm doing it in one layer, all the different colors dancing together on one layer. But sometimes there are people that separate the different colors and the different hues to their own layers for better organization, or you separate it per object. Maybe shirts are on one layer. You can organize it however you see fit. But here, I'm actually putting all the flats on one layer. So here, we're just doing all the final touches, turning all the layers on. A dash of white in the eyes to really bring the characters to life. You have this extra layer, adding like a rim light. And in here, I'm using one of the brushes called Droplets. to add these yellow, almost white particles around to show that maybe there's sand or dust in the air, also hit by the sun. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that, and that's me drawing from experience, what I've seen in life. And sometimes if I was using a reference, it'll probably be in the reference as well. Droplets is the closest brush I need to attempt that effect, and that's just what I'm doing. Type thing. It's not exactly white. It does have a yellowish hint to it, but it's very harsh. And I may add another layer right below it, reducing the opacity, soft airbrush with a color dodge of something orange. Again, all trying to fit the mood. You can see me now, I've shifted from Clip Studio Paint to Photoshop, because you can save files in Clip Studio Paint as PSDs and open them in Photoshop. You can also use the same brushes going back and forth to show you that all these tricks can be used for any software. But when it comes to adding filters and adjustment layers and effects, currently I still prefer Photoshop a little bit. You can do all these things in Clip Studio Paint, but they're much easier to do and faster to do in Photoshop. Remember that hard light, that bounce rim light? It's on a separate layer of its own. You double click that layer, and then we can give it an outer glow, duplicate, outer glow, change the color or the blending mode to whatever you see fit. Again, I'm still keeping it very warm. You can even do a color dodge, and it just makes it seem like the sun is hitting the character pretty hard, but then there's still light bouncing off of the character at that same spot, and it just gives the overall image a nice little sauce. So now I'm selecting every layer, duplicating them, and then merging all of the duplicates. I kind of did this already, so I'm deleting the previous files. That's all this is. And then I duplicate the new merged duplicate, and then one on top. I select the whole image. I give it a Gaussian blur about 30%, reduce the opacity maybe like 40%, and change the blending mode to lighten, and it gives it that nice anime look. Softens everything. In After Effects, you might call this diffusion, and that's one of the best ways to make your stuff look like you're watching it off the screen. And then once that's done, just for kicks, I can select the whole image again. After I duplicate the two duplicates, where one is kind of like a merge of all the duplicates, and then the other one is the one with the lighten blending mode, the reduced opacity, and the initial blur. I can duplicate those two, merge that new pair, select it all, and now under filters at the top, I can give it some noise. Again, Clip Studio Paint can do all these things as well, but this is just to show you that you can move between software and still get similar results. I'm just faster at doing all these things in Photoshop. For Prince Ashokan Caesar and Sir Jekyll Khan. Published this year, licensed Saturday AM. Do not miss this volume, guys. It is my best work to date. Please do the engagement stuff unless we have beef, and then have fun with this video where we're drawing from reference, but having it be more fun, dynamic, and honestly better than the reference photo. Swat Manga, I'm Audi 9000.